Thanks for tuning in to another installment of Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that analyzes shows and celebrates women of television. Thousands of comedies, variety shows, and dramas have aired, yet the presence of strong women, both in front of and behind the camera, is often a story untold. Well, Advanced TV Herstory begs to differ. There's so much more, and it's worth telling and retelling. Sometimes shows offer great leadership lessons, or are so timeless in their writing that people say the series has aged well. We'll explore those shows further. We'll revisit moments in TV where women broke records, exceeded expectations, or put their careers on the line. Advanced TV Herstory will connect the treasures of the past to the great potential of today's TV and online platforms, and how it all plays a part in being a woman in America today. Tomorrow's success is rooted in understanding what has come before us. So gear up for a little storytelling and fun, sociology, fashion, economics, or strategy. It's all here in Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. There was a time when the acting profession was segregated by stature. Broadway and the stage held the aura of Shakespeare. Film and movies were the expensive extravagance, with the egos to go along with the notion of immortality via the silver screen. Or as Norma Desmond proclaimed in the 1950 Billy Wilder flick about Hollywood, entitled Sunset Boulevard,
"Haven't I seen you before? I know your face.
Get out, or shall I call my servant?
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures. Used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
I knew there was something wrong.
And then there's TV, the small screen. This installment of Advanced TV Herstory is a profile of an actress recognized for her performances across all those forms. Patty Duke. Listeners young and old, bear with me. She more than starred in the Ginchy TV series that bore her name. Though it's true, there is no catchier theme on TV ever. Back to Patty Duke, the woman. It's a very small club of women whose resumes feature an Oscar, Emmy statues, and top billing in a Broadway play for 730 performances. Patty Duke's career was complicated and filled with ups and downs, and those are important to understand in the context of her career and in her life and what she brings to America today. So this installment features those ups and downs as they were made public by Patty. Her 1987 autobiography is an incredibly well-written, accessible read. I recommend it. When her book first came out, the pinnacle of the serious talk show circuit was Phil Donahue. Patty appeared with Phil, and fortunately, someone, bless their hearts, converted this VHS treasure and uploaded it to YouTube. I'll be using those clips in this episode, and let me tell you, I apologize for the lack of sound quality, but it is a treasure. And that video is important because their voices do the storytelling. Or, in Phil Donahue's case, he reads the book out loud. And really, some elements of her youth and teen years are jarring. Patty's story is about growing up in the entertainment industry at the hands of two surrogate parent agents who abused her emotionally in wretched ways. Patty's career as a child phenom hit a sandbar in the 1970s. She began reclaiming her life and career upon her 1980 diagnosis of manic depression. So she chronicles the many episodes and acting opportunities in her book as well, perhaps the first and most famous person to do so in such a public fashion. It all makes for a remarkable story. So, listener, as a friend or parent or child or boss or colleague, you're likely to know someone who has a mental health condition. Knowledge is power, and I'm hopeful that you come away from this installment of Advanced TV Herstory with some new knowledge or perspective in this retelling of Patty's story. And really, though, her name is Anna. Born in 1946 as Anna Marie Duke, we know her as Patty because those stage parents, who we'll get introduced to, who her own parents surrendered her to when she was 8.
You are, you're Catholic and you want to be a nun.
Which makes me about 7.
But very early, very very early on, let's try and get to this because you're going to have questions. You are surrendered by her mother to a married couple who are essentially theatrical agents by the name of Ross, except their real name is Rossi. They changed it from Rossi to Ross because they felt that you were better off to be Jewish in this arena of the marketplace, the theater and showbiz.
Reverse anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Now she becomes a step for a child. They tell her what to eat. They tell her what to wear. They dyed your first communion dress, didn't they?
They dyed my communion dress pink, yes. Obviously, you know that that's a sacrilege. You just don't do that.
But you stood there as an obedient child.
Yeah, I thought I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was a very obedient child, very close to my mother, very, very attached to my mother. So this wrenching was, we know now, an extraordinarily traumatic thing for me. And therefore, I felt that the only way I could survive was to do everything they said, and that permeated the entire movie.
One of the first things the Rosses tried to break me of was my New York speech patterns. They did it by giving me an English accent. What also started immediately was working on my appearance, which meant picking me apart, a constant tearing down. While I can remember genuine kindness from John, I think he was very taken with me. Ethel was a different story. Ethel and John Ross.
In 1987, when Anna, okay, I'm going to make it simpler for all of us and just call her Duke, appeared on Phil Donahue, it had to have been a pretty big deal. Phil's topics were sometimes very heavy, and it was a well-produced, fairly intellectual show that was usually a straight interview plus question and answer format. As you heard, Phil does his best to get Anna's foundational story told so they can get on to the rest of the book.
Ethel and John Ross. There was a lot of anger in her, a hard, opinionated edge, and she really got vicious when she'd been drinking. John was completely intimidated by her at those moments. He'd get a sad look on his face as if to say, don't pay any attention, she's just booze talking. Ethel always said she liked Ray the best.
That's my brother.
She liked they wanted you to be like Grace Kelly. Your crinolines were starched to the point where they scratched your legs.
With sugar water.
But what they apparently succeeded in doing, as soon as it became necessary for them to deal, every question, you rehearsed questions for interviews.
Absolutely.
When you'd go
if
to
I sat here and did this show with you, there couldn't be a question you could come up with
that
they hadn't already programmed me
and
for.
many of the answers were lies.
Very many of them were lies.
Or
certainly distorted.
Even beyond the miracle worker, some of your bios included material that you never really were even in.
Yes. They had the Arthur Murray dance party or something, and I hadn't even been born when that
But you were
began.
ready for the question if somebody asked you.
Indeed. I had a backup story for everything.
Right. They also insisted that you change your age.
Yes.
From 8 to 6, or was it?
Mm-hmm. The concept being that I was so little that it would be much more appealing to think of this tiny child as a 6-year-old and a genius as opposed to a nice average 8-year-old.
Right. They told you Anne Marie's dead, you're Patty now. They liked Patty better, and
yes.
It was more theatrical, they thought.
Yeah. Catchier.
And you were how old?
I was 8.
You were 8 when you were told that you were dead, so to speak, in an emotional sense. You make quite a bit about this, and so not a few psychiatrists, no doubt. Which explains the title of your book, Call Me Anna. You're still trying to find out who you are.
Do me a favor and keep the word resilient in the top of your mind. As I said, the book is very detailed. Duke's memory for details is, even particularly the unpleasant ones, is quite rich. So among the parts of the book that don't totally get discussed on the Phil Donahue Show are some of her greatest accomplishments as a young actress. It was only a 1-hour-long show, and they did have to air commercials. So, you should know that her entry into show business came in doing small TV bits, which led the Rosses to coaching her for an audition for a Broadway role of Helen Keller. That is, yes, the story of Helen Keller, the miracle worker, was going to be taken to Broadway, live. Duke tells of preparing for the role and getting to work with Anne Bancroft, who played teacher Annie Sullivan. That must have been a very powerful performance to see in person. Duke's recollection of the 10-minute fight scene, highly choreographed and filled with bruises, real broken bones, and real emotion, gives us an insight into this legendary run on Broadway. Duke was 12 when the play started, and 2 years later, went on to play the role of Helen Keller in the movie adaptation. And the movie adaptation, if you ever see it, is it has a stage feel to it. It's not a mid-60s sort of highly colorized epic. It's real. It's gritty. And Duke, from both experiences, though, claims that one of the primary benefits of this intense fight scene, which she conducted daily on stage, was the release of negative energy and frustration that she had internalized at the hands of the Rosses. This is growing up. This is being a preteen and teenager. So YouTube contains highlight reels and scenes of the 1962 production of The Miracle Worker. I encourage you to watch them. And then watch the 1979 remake for TV, in which Anna Marie Duke stars as Annie Sullivan. And Melissa Gilbert, at the height of her Little House on the Prairie fame, plays Helen Keller. So remember that these are roles that required acting, real acting. It required physical timing and mastery of sounds and facial expressions, because the story, the script, as you might guess, because it's about the education of a girl who could not see or hear, really contains very little dialogue. This is acting. But as a 12-year-old, Duke was living anything but a normal life.
Brainwashing, because all the time that I was hating it, I was professing to love it. Until there was a time when I thought I did love acting and living with them, and, obviously the even more hideous things came later.
Speaking of hideous, when we traveled, we all stayed in one room. John and Ethel on 2 big beds and me on a cot. The shower helped a little. You were in the sun. You're a young girl, but you're drinking banana daiquiris.
I was 12.
You were 12. The banana daiquiris were good because they were sweet. Obviously, your mentors, your Svengalis, the Rosses, apparently seemed to think that's okay. I heard the door open when they came in, and I pretended to be asleep because if I had to talk to them, I'd throw up for sure. The room was really flying now. I was desperately trying to regulate my breathing, anything to make this sensation go away, nausea. John came out of the shower and began to bicker. She said something like, "I don't care, I'm taking a nap," and got in bed with me. Then he came around and got in bed on the other side. They were both lying very close to me, and I made some noises to indicate discomfort, but nobody changed positions. Then he began to fondle me, and he got an erection, which was up against my rear end. My whole body felt very hot, not just from my sunburn, but from the inside, as if all the capillaries were bursting. She's 12. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Ethel was making similar moves on her side. I made another noise as if I were asleep but uncomfortable, and he pursued and put his leg over me. I sat bolt upright and threw up all over him.
So, throughout her teens, Duke was pulling down real paychecks, which, by the way, the Rosses spent like drunken sailors on luxuries for themselves. And Duke was a very famous child star. The 1930s had their Shirley Temple. The 40s gave us Elizabeth Taylor and Mickey Rooney lighting up the screen as those crazy teenagers. And in the 1950s, we had Natalie Wood. But Duke didn't earn her stripes just playing any child or preteen role. She was Helen Keller. And Duke recounts in the book actually getting to meet the legend Helen Keller in person. The Miracle Worker, the movie, was a celebrated national hit in the theaters, and Duke was the youngest performer ever to earn an Oscar, although Tatum O'Neal would best her by winning in 1973 for her performance in Paper Moon. Anne Bancroft received an Oscar, too, for Best Actress in a Leading Role. And that year, 1963, Duke won a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer in the female category, and a Laurel Award for Top Female Supporting Performance. So Ethel and John Ross had coached Duke on every aspect of successfully navigating in the public eye. In most cases, the words you hear from her mouth in interviews and in articles weren't her first choice and didn't bear her feelings, as witnessed in what has to be the shortest acceptance speech in the history of the Oscars.
For Best Supporting Actor in West Side Story, Mr. George Shakiris. George?
For Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role, Those nominated are Mary Badham in To Kill a Mockingbird, Patty Duke in The Miracle Worker, Shirley Knight in Sweet Bird of Youth, Angela Lansbury in The Manchurian Candidate, and Thelma Ritter in Birdman of Alcatraz. The winner is Patty Duke in The Miracle Worker.
Yes, 2 words. If you weren't listening, you missed it. You heard it. Thank you. In her book, Duke tells us that was part of the humility, the don't screw it up pounding that the Rosses inflicted on her self-esteem. Remember, resilient, and she was all of 5 feet tall. And she is all of 5 feet tall. So, having proven her acting chops on the stage and in film, it was only natural that Duke's appeal to her teenage baby boom peers should land her on TV. Okay, so you may or may not remember a 1961 movie that featured Haley Mills as twins, The Parent Trap? Or maybe you remember the remake from 1998 starring Lindsay Lohan. Now there's another story. But the parents in the film, The Parent Trap, are separated, and the twins connive to reunite them. And they go to camp, and they have adventures. It's light-hearted family fare with one actress playing 2 parts, with camera work joining them in scenes. So why not put the incredibly talented Patty, Anna Marie Duke, into a sitcom where she plays identical cousins? Yes, America fell in love with Patty Lane and her European cousin Kathy in their home in Brooklyn Heights. It was shot in black and white, even though there was an opportunity to transition to color, and they used the same production techniques each week that had only been seen on the silver screen. So think about it. In this larger context, a series in the mid-60s about 2 teenage girls? Disruptive. State-of-the-art camera work? Disruptive. This show is a time capsule.
That he wanted both sides of my personality to be represented. And that's how he invented identical cousins. Kathy came from General Europe. At first she was supposed to come from Scotland, and I did the Scottish accent so well they couldn't understand me. So they made it a general whatever. She came to live with Patty and the rest of the Lane family, a mother, father, brother, and boyfriend, Eddie Applegate. They would trade places, play tricks on people, use each other to get out of scams that they would, mostly Patty would invent. Kathy was my favorite because she was calm and sedate and spoke nicely. I didn't like Patty. She embarrassed me.
In her book, Call Me Anna, Duke describes the transition to sitcom production and to TV production overall, her transition to California, and her later teenage years, which included encounters with many men who were older and younger than she. But America really just wanted its Patty and Kathy. Duke finds a peace and goodness in the whole experience which a reader might conclude was as disruptive for her as it was for the country. Now remember, her manic depression was still sort of perhaps in a dormant phase. She describes it throughout the book. And if it happens to be showing on some obscure cable channel, though, I will stop in my tracks and watch a little slice of The Patty Duke Show, this wonderful made-up life circa 1963 to 1966. Because whereas Leave It to Beaver is so male-centric that you can practically smell the Old Spice and hair tonic, The Patty Duke Show was about music and growing up and competing and collaborating and, in a sense, seeing two sides of an issue or a problem or an opportunity or a person.
Absolutely nailed it on the head. Who knew that he was prescient and I would eventually be diagnosed bipolar?
And Kathy was quiet and smart and refined. And dressed that way, the hair, the look.
Well, actually, they dressed her dowdy, in my opinion.
Patty was the all-American wild kind of teenager with crazy ideas and all that.
Crazy ideas, and was going to fulfill them no matter what. But that show had something that I don't think shows have had until now, maybe Modern Family. That family had a father and a mother who were the head of the household. These kids may have played these pranks and all that, but there were consequences. And there was a wonderful relationship between Patty and her father. He was usually the one passing down the wisdom or passing down the consequence.
Sadly, when we as modern women pound on the stereotypes of womanhood in the early 60s, we focus our attention entirely too much on Donna Reed and Barbara Billingsley, who played June Cleaver. They were moms. Patty and Kathy were daughters. If you were to track their age according to Anna Marie Duke's real age, then they were born in 1946. They are the same age as Hillary Rodham Clinton and as Susan Sarandon, and they are a year younger than Debbie Harry. So, in a sense, they'd have become identical Hellraisers, if you ask me. And so it's important that when we draw parallels, we need to take age and life experience into account. We need to be easier on each other, apples to apples, you know? Okay, so Duke discussed a few other aspects of the show, and it's 105 episodes in a great interview contained on my favorite YouTube source, METV Legends, and that's a product of the Archive of American Television. There are also a few documentaries on Duke's life on YouTube, and they'll tell you that her career following her own TV show was somewhat consistent, with short-lived series and guest star roles in well-known dramas all on TV, and a few movie appearances as well. The highs and lows associated with manic depression pepper her life in the 70s. Her love life included a well-documented, well-publicized, though pre-TMZ, romance with then underage, she didn't know it at the time, Desi Arnaz Jr., and Lucille Ball's, that's his mother, equally public disapproval of it. An emotional, highly charged role in the made-for-TV movie My Sweet Charlie was a struggle for Duke to complete, though she did. And on Emmy night, at the age of 23, she was up against some of the biggest names of the silver and small screen. Her hair was an early 70s masterpiece, but that was about the only thing Duke had going for her that evening.
Now, for Outstanding Single Performance by an Actress in a Leading Role, the nominees are Dame Edith Evans for David Copperfield, Shirley Jones for Silent Night, Lonely Night, Patty Duke for My Sweet Charlie world premiere movie. Thank you. And the winner is, in Los Angeles, Patty Duke for My Sweet Charlie.
Thank you. And you. And Dame Edith Evans. I know you're over there somewhere. You. Mom. Happy birthday.
I've also been taught not to say thank you for too long. But the best words I've ever learned were hello, enthusiasm, and thank you.
Well, this acceptance speech was more than 2 words long. Duke has described it as a nationally televised nightmare. Her walk up to the podium was the first sign that something wasn't right. She strode up the steps, stepped around the presenters, Julia Summers, who will be played in a movie someday by Connie Britton, and Monty Hall, the legend from Let's Make a Deal. She took the statue, stared into the camera with, it's hard to say, you really need to see it. They seem like lifeless eyes, or were they in fact deep? And for once, Duke was standing still and broadcasting in living color. The American viewer had seen her deliver such a wide range of dramatic excellence. Was this just a moment of genius? It wasn't. She was suffering in a big way and unfortunately lived another decade without a concrete diagnosis, until her manic depression was discovered through a drug interaction. So literally by accident. Anna Marie Duke turned a corner towards stable mental health and has never looked back. So that's the lion's share of what the audience in Chicago, in Phil Donahue's studio, was soaking up that afternoon in 1987. The room was filled with folks of all ages, many of whom had probably seen every one of Duke's works. They probably knew all the lyrics to the TV theme song, and maybe 20 years ago had bought her LPs when the Rosses told her that music was as lucrative as acting at this stage to her career. And Duke was not a very good singer. Whether the audience had had the chance to read the book or not, they were there out of respect and admiration for a woman who spoke with honesty and courage. Now, as we understand mental health and recovery better today, we hear in these words an effort to forgive and move on. Phil asks Duke why she included John and Ethel Ross in her book dedication.
You did that is because...
I'm not sure I know why, because it just came out when I was writing that down.
So between all this
Except that I think that what I meant to be sure I was saying was that through all of this horror, through all of the distortion of their own lives, out of greed or whatever, there really was somewhere in there a bonding. Call it love, if you will, or not. But there was something of value about these people.
Her body language was open. I don't know enough about how the Phil Donahue Show processed audience questions to know whether they were vetted in advance, but Duke answered scores of questions, usually with information contained in the book. Otherwise, they were 1 or 2 sentence statements, seemingly fairly well rehearsed. She kept a swift pace during this part of the show, sharing as much as she felt comfortable sharing, but also demonstrating she owned her life. Had anyone on TV ever talked about lithium before Patty Duke did?
You know, if you're going to be creative, you have to be half a bubble off plum, and my creativity would go away. And I must say, it's thrilling that has been quite the opposite. The ability to get through a day as normally uncomfortable as anybody else. And then do my work and be a fertile field for new imaginings has really been a miracle.
We should say that your mother survives, and in fact you enjoy a relationship with her now.
I enjoy a wonderful relationship with my mother. She's indeed alive. She lives in Westwood, very near us, and is probably watching this very minute.
My question was, do you resent...
How many entertainers were secretly on lithium in the mid-'80s? How many of her peers and regular people sought help only after reading her book? Audience members asked her questions about her suicide attempts, like which was the worst, and her experience in analysis, which what we call today talk therapy. They were so eager for information. Watching this is not only a step back in time for hair and fashion, but also it's one of where we were as a nation in understanding and accepting those with mental illness.
First of all, I must say that you look fantastic.
Thank you. That's nice. Thank you.
Was it difficult for you to come out and tell your story?
Sure. It's difficult because it's one thing to be judged for your work and have trouble accepting those kind of negative judgments. It's a whole other thing to deal with people being judgmental about your life. I mean, if anybody knows I screwed it up, it's me. But the difficulty was far outweighed by my need to not become an evangelist about manic depression or lithium or anything like that, but about surviving and hope. And there are ways to beat the bad systems. Thank you.
In this and every interview conducted since, Duke is in control. The book shared her brutal childhood story that a 21st century reader would believe unthinkable today. But do we really know? It's positively Dickensian in its cruelty, striding alongside good intentions of these adults who just exercised a tremendous amount of selfish, poor judgment. She wrote the book, went public, starred in regional theater productions, and worked occasionally on TV. Those years are highlighted by a somewhat unexpected 2-year term of Duke's service to the Screen Actors Guild, which is the actors' union, as its president. And in the book, she talks about the importance of union representation. If you go to the Screen Actors Guild website, the SAG website, you'll find her accomplishments that took place during her term as president. It's something she should be proud of, and I'm proud of for her. America loves the black and white images of the identical cousins of Brooklyn Heights. America may or may not have ever seen either version of The Miracle Worker. I didn't. Where was I? Sure, it's heavy material, but there are so few widely acclaimed movies that feature two strong women leads that Patty Duke and Anne Bancroft gave to us that it's a shame that TV or the distribution networks have passed it over. Nope, let's just reload up and give us some more Hogan's Heroes and Big Bang Theory and, oh yeah, How I Met Your Mother. Yeah, there's women in that show. Oh, and yes, for the made-for-TV version of The Miracle Worker, Duke bagged another Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a limited series or special. Now, a future installment of Advanced TV Herstory will focus on Duke's public profile as an advocate for mental health services and education. Her TV presence has shifted from wearing capris and hairbands to providing commentary on mental health topics for national TV networks. Which gets me to wondering if a producer, maybe from CNN, was urgently trying to get a hold of Duke on the evening Britney Spears had her live meltdown on TV and shaved her head, and what Duke was thinking that night. Sadly, I have to say that the media interest in women, particularly young women, who melt down in public is far stronger than it is of men and young men who have issues and have a public drama. Alec Baldwin? Forgotten. Mel Gibson? Huh? Shia LaBeouf? Who? Nope. Duke has shared her life and gifts with us. If you are unfamiliar with them, then the loss is yours. America may only remember her in black and white as teenage cousins, but that was all it took for some clever PR person at the Social Security Administration to realize that there's still some mileage left in Patty and Kathy. So I'm about to play for you some public service announcements that recently aired, and I just have to believe that PR person at Social Security, laboring in government all those years, it was a woman who came up with this idea.
Hello? Patty, I've decided to follow your lead and file for Social Security benefits online.
But Kath, aren't you back in Zanzibar?
I just got on my laptop and went to socialsecurity.gov. It took less than 15 minutes. Wow, you are a miracle worker. Well, cheers, Patty. I'm off to film a baby rhino. Baby rhino?
Meet Kathy, who's lived most everywhere, from Zanzibar to Berkeley Square.
But Patty's only seen the sights a girl can see from Brooklyn Heights. What a crazy pair.
Kath, have you heard from Patty and Richard yet?
Yes. Patty was going to stop and pick up a pie, and Richard was going to file for Medicare.
Filing for Medicare? We won't eat till midnight tomorrow.
Richard's filing for Medicare online at socialsecurity.gov. It takes less than 10 minutes.
10 minutes? But I had to go to the office and wait.
Online.
What about the paperwork?
Online.
But Richard's still working.
Online. Hey.
You made it.
No problemo, Papo. I got the pie.
And I got my Medicare.
And I've got the turkey.
Did you get that online, too?
Yes, that last one contained the actors who are still living from the show that aired 50 years ago, including William Schallert, who turns 94 this year. Aren't we the lucky ones that Anna Marie Duke is resilient? Her strength and conviction has changed lives. Something I'm guessing is more important to her than the industry trophies on her mantle. You've been listening to Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that studies women and TV and hair and public moments. Audio clips come from video that is all available on YouTube. There are 5 parts to the Phil Donahue episode that aired in 1987. The Social Security Administration has proudly posted the Patty Duke PSAs to YouTube, along with shorter and longer versions. METV Legends audio set the context for Duke's perspective on the development of her TV series, and the clips from the awards shows are simply stunning. They're available on YouTube also. So thanks for tuning in, and please leave comments or feedback at the hosting sites Libsyn, Libsyn, or iTunes. Track the podcast down on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TV Herstory. Patty Duke is on Twitter too, and she's got many more followers than we do, but she deserves them. If you prefer to keep your thoughts a bit more private, they're safe with me via email, so send it to me at advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. Scripts for this episode and past installments can be found at my website, CynthiaBemisAbrams.com. It's also another way for you to get a hold of me. So, yep, keep in touch. Let's dream up the next groovy installment together. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.